Hi, Natalie. Okay, it's so nice to be back and here live in my IGTV. Hello everyone, I'm going to invite Sundaram, who is already requested for me to accept him. We will start our conversation. Let's see, Sundaram will join us in just a second. I'm sure there's a... Here you
Hello.
go. Hello,
So good to see
good
you.
morning. So good to see you. How are you?
Very well. It's I guess it's good evening there, right?
Good evening, yes, and good morning. I'm sorry that I woke you up quite early this morning.
No. It's a pleasure, real pleasure.
Thank you once again, Sundaram. And it's so nice, I've started this conversations with Olga almost 2 years ago, and I took a break during the summer holidays, and it's right. I'm so happy to be back. And for somebody who doesn't know about this project, I will say a few words about conversations with Olga. I will also say a few words about you, Sundaram, before we move into our fascinating conversation. So I'll just do a very, very short bio about you to our listeners. Yeah. Well, good morning, New York. Good evening, Singapore, and good afternoon, Europe. Whoever listening to us from Europe, I'm Olga, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back. As I said, after the summer's break, I will say a few words about conversations with Olga that I've started about 2 years ago during the circuit breaker, and with the goal to introduce the friends and personalities whom I've met during my career to the multicultural Singaporean and worldwide community through the platform that accessible and interesting and easy for me to capture because I'm not a technology person. So this is how it's all started, basically. The conversations run the gamut of intellectual and cultural exchanges to more personal conversations about the people fulfilling their dreams and their passions. And my main mission is the hope for the series is to inspire and cultivate a more diverse and inclusive communities all around the world. And today is my honor to welcome our guest for the episode number 35, my dear friend, Sundaram Tagore. I will be very brief to say a few words about you, Sundaram, and we will move with some of the topics that I would love to chat with you about. And I will read a short introduction about you. Sundaram Tagore is a Calcutta-born, Oxford-educated art historian, gallerist, and award-winning filmmaker. A descendant of the poet and Nobel Prize winner Rabindranath Tagore, Sundaram promotes East-West dialogue through exhibitions and events at his galleries in New York, Singapore, London, and at museums worldwide. Tagore was previously director of Pace Wildenstein Gallery, New York. He has worked with many international organizations, including the National Gallery of Modern Art in New Delhi, the Metropolitan Museum, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the United Nations. He's also a trustee for the Isamu Noguchi Museum in New York. Sundaram has written for numerous art publications and lectures, frequently on art, including at the Thalberg Forum, Sweden, Sotheby's Hong Kong's Forum Correspondence Club, and Singapore Management University. And of course, I must mention a very special project that we'll talk a little bit about later on this evening is your documentary on called Louis Kahn's Tiger City. Your feature-length documentary about the famous architect Louis I. Kahn, and it's debuted in the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 2019, and is available for screening and for viewing on Amazon Prime. So please, it's an amazing documentary. I watched it. Well, welcome to Conversations with Olga Sundaram.
Thank you so much for that kind and generous
to see you on this platform. I would like to start with your personal journey, with your family. I have read poems and even listened to some of the music of Rabindranath Tagore when I was a young girl, and it's amazing to meet a descendant of this incredible family, incredible person, and his vision and love for culture and his philosophical views fascinated me since really since I was a young girl. And actually one of my favorite quotes from him is, "We come nearest to the great when we are great in humility." So I think that's very, very profound. So I would love to hear your family story and about your roots that clearly influenced you in your life journey. And this is, I guess, how your passion was born.
Um, I grew up as you can imagine, I grew up in a house of art and culture. My father was an artist, he was a poet and writer. So I didn't really grow up in a kind of conventional Indian home where the thrust wasn't to make money. You just did things that really you followed your passion. And that was really important. So originally we grew up in this big, vast joint family. And a lot of the people who are really, one of my ancestors had made his fortune, and after that, no one worked. They only worked for creative reasons and for betterment of society, building universities, building museums. There were scientists, there were artists, there were poets, there were writers. And I think Rabindranath Tagore benefited from that exposure, all within the family. The discourse was pretty intense. And in some sense, my father, who was an artist, and he was a first among the Indian modernist artists, they created a group called Calcutta Group. After returning from London, he had gone to London to study art in the Central College of Art, and he had interacted with a lot of the people from the Bloomsbury Group. So he called it the Calcutta Group. There was the first women artists included in that group. And this is, I'm talking about 1930s, late 30s and 40s. And after that, new generation of artists started emerging, like the Bombay Progressive Group has become very famous. But they were really significant artists in terms of dealing with modernism. What does modernism mean to a traditional culture? And so we grew up in that house. My father also ran an art magazine.
Yeah.
And we had an open sort of a salon. Every evening, people would pour in, you know. There were editors from Statesman. There were all kinds of poets and writers, so really famous people would just show up at between 5 and until 9 or 10. You stayed on for dinner. It was an open house in that context.
Incredible.
So I was
It sounds
exposed to that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it truly was incredible. You can't create that in this day and age. It's impossible. We don't have the time. We don't have the human resources to do that. You know, that's completely, it was very, very different part, a kind of different psychology too, you know, to have the generosity to give to people and have that time and openness. We don't have that anymore. So that's the kind of home.
Conversations without the phones, without messaging each other or somebody else. You actually immerse into this circle of people who want to talk and who want to share. This is incredible. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely right. There's this pure conversation without any agenda. And it's essentially learning from each other by questioning each other about their creative process, you know. So yeah, it was wonderful to be in that, but it wasn't very structured, you know, not structured in a kind of, we were constantly moving back and forth, you know, in different places.
Well, creative people are not really structured, so.
Okay. So that's the kind of home that I grew up in. And my mother was very talented, and she was a journalist. And my mother started working as an editor for the All India Radio. And then there was a kind of a Naxalbari movement, a Naxalite, a communist movement that penetrated Calcutta and Bengal. And that was that region. And so we all moved to Delhi and the late 60s. And then 79, 80, I left India, you know, and I moved to the West.
You traveled the world.
So yeah, I lived in many places. I lived in about 8 different countries and many, many different cities. So I love cities, you know. I really, really love cities. I mean, we are all drawn to nature, but in terms of cities, I'm really drawn to cities. I love to explore the cities and what it can offer, you know. So
I'm with you. I'm also very much of a city person. I love nature, but I can relate much more to the cities and the metropolis of it and breath of the people around me. And energy of it. So I'm with you. Do you think that actually there might be some genetic predisposition that comes from generations that you also sort of acquired all these talents and passions from the roots of your family?
I can't talk about genetic predisposition. Who knows about that? But what I know, exposure is very, very important. To
Yeah.
expose a young person, expose and somehow expose them to a whole new world. You know, it's that is critically important for us, without any question. So when
I
you're exposed to the world of art, go ahead, please.
no, go ahead. I'm listening.
Yeah. So I think being exposed, taking your children to a museum or taking them to an art gallery or taking them to exposing them to a literary festival, taking them to a theater or a musical composition very early on, it opens and broadens your mind and opens
Absolutely.
up a whole new world that we wouldn't imagine, you know. And I think that's very, very important. And to a certain extent, that's what happened. I bought my first work of art by breaking my piggy bank, you know. And I mean, there were a few hundred rupees, you know, and in those days, there was a lot of money for me, of course, you know. And I
Yes.
bought this piece of ceramics. I remember buying that. So not buying is not, I'm not saying it's important, but I'm saying the association is really important, you know.
Yes, absolutely. And the feel for the art. And this is something that I can absolutely relate to. This is how I was growing up. For me, the pastime was spent in the museums and in philharmonic concerts and in the theaters. So it's definitely part of life that gives us so much and brings us to the world the way we are. And we can express ourselves through so many different ways and create the experiences for others. So I second what you're saying, absolutely.
And
You know, and
art also has a transformational quality. When you expose yourself to this world, something happens to you, your psychology changes, and
yes,
it becomes much more, you're more grounded that way, you know. You're not
yes,
jittery in that context.
yes, I agree with you. And actually, I want to touch about being more grounded when we talk a little bit about the art collection, because, you know, I have a few questions about collecting the art and purpose of collecting the art. So I will move on into this in a bit. But what do you think that I want to also ask you about the booming art market. Do you think that there is an East-West transcending art trend these days? And what is your take on the collection of art, and especially in relationship to the wealth of the people of high society who can afford to buy art?
I think if you're talking about, you know, the world is getting more globalized, whether we like it or not. We are
Yeah,
interdependent. We are truly interdependent. Look at it. Today, we are able to speak to you from, you're in Singapore, I'm in New York, with effortless, right? The technology has made it. So in that context, one is a genetic sort of you're talking about influence. Another is a mental influence, how what you're exposed to. I mean, today we have technology that can a friend can be walking through a museum in Istanbul and walk through and show us what's going on. So those kind of things can happen, and that can change the way we look at things and way we perceive things, right? That's one part. The
yeah,
second, the world, more and more people are getting together because of globalization, because of ease of access to travel, and we're this kind of bicultural, and the third culture that's emerging. And the big cities are the biggest kind of a growth process in our 21st century. And this confluence of culture that's taking place, they're creating third culture. That is about East-West. Essentially, if you bifurcate, it doesn't matter South-North or East-West, whatever you call it, this combination, combined culture. And
yeah,
out of that comes a third culture. And it's everywhere, everywhere.
yeah.
Everything is happening because of third culture. So
Yes,
yes,
I
I agree with you.
It's wonderful, but I also agree with you. It's a completely global world that we live in, and just without borders, I suppose. Uh, but I want to touch a little bit about the collecting and how does the collecting of art relates to the wealthy people of high society who can afford to sit in private auctions, who spend millions of dollars to buy art just to resell it after a little while, within several years when the prices rise. What is your take on investing in art pieces? Is it the main reason for art collectors?
I think collecting is different from buying art for investment. When you're a collector, you have a tremendous amount of passion. You're collecting, you're following someone, you have a great deal of, you acquire a great deal of knowledge, and you will travel. I mean, you will fly across the globe to go for that piece of work, because that's the passion of a collector.
Yeah.
The moment you have investment in your head, no matter who you are, you could be having a private plane and yachts, and it doesn't matter. If you have the investment in your head, you are working as a dealer.
Yes,
You're
it
not a
becomes a
collector.
commodity. Yes.
Yeah, you cannot say I am a collector just because you're collecting art and reselling it. You're not a collector. Later on, as a collector, you may distill your collection, sell some of the works, but that was never the motivation. Motivation of a collector is I want to get that object because
Yes.
it's so meaningful for me. And without that, I cannot live. And that is the basic motivation of a collector. And they have a distinct differences, because dealers could be very knowledgeable. There's nothing wrong with that. They could be very, very knowledgeable. They have a connoisseurship, and they may identify really important pieces, but the motivation is money. I'm going to resell it, and therefore, because I'm reselling it, and takes a different take, and different composition.
I agree with you. Well, I can't call myself a collector, but for me personally, spending time in the presence of art makes me see things from a fresh, exciting perspective, and my passions are born, and my creativity builds out based on the art that I see and experience emotionally. So, and I also feel that sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, that collecting art is a bit intuitive. And more you learn, the more taste your taste is becoming more refined, I suppose.
Yeah,
and you develop the sort of a connoisseurship in a way. And
absolutely right. So essentially, the eye is like a muscle. The more you do heavy lifting with art, great art, if you look at your essentially something is happening to your brain, and your refinement in terms of your taste is getting more heightened. And I really believe in that. Like if you listen to elevator music versus listening to great music, what happens? Sooner or later, you'll rely on that, And if you listen to great music or great theater, great literature, and you would, or reading Harlequin romance, or you're reading Dostoevsky, completely different, right? It's a different, qualitatively
you're
different.
so right. You just touched the subject that is so true, and I totally believe in it. I can't stand the elevator music. So yeah.
So.
Very well said, and I'm thanking you for that. And I feel that also there are certain social bonds that collectors develop with one another, and they have the way of communicating with one another about themselves and about the world within their own world, and they develop these incredible networks that they just connect each other. And I definitely feel when I'm surrounded by the people who appreciate and enjoy art in the galleries, in the museums, and just in the gatherings.
Yeah, you feel the vibration,
Yes.
You feel the collective's vibration, and you're there, and you're in a special space, because they have the kind of intensity in terms of conversation and knowledge, and how they are dispensing that,
Yes.
and you feel that you're in a space that is qualitatively distinct from the other spaces that you've occupied,
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so yeah.
Yes, I agree with you, absolutely. So what would be your most basic advice for the beginner art collector?
I mean, art is about looking, right? Really about looking. First thing I say, look at all this great art, wherever you get a chance, whenever you get a chance, go to these museums and look at the best of the best. Don't rely too much on the conversation other people are having. Let that go for the moment.
Yeah.
You look at great works of art, whether in your own city or whether when you get the chance to travel, go to these great museums and look at it, and automatically something will happen. And your taste would be so heightened. It's like drinking a great glass of wine, There are wine, and then the other kinds, are much more heightened, more refined, and you'll acquire the refined taste. And that your eye will get more powerful that way.
Yes, it's a sort of a grooming of your own senses, of your own,
Exactly.
yes.
Because it's a little bit subjective, so you're drawn to
Yes.
certain kinds of art, whether you're looking at classical art or whether you're looking at contemporary art or modern art, and you're drawn to certain things because of your own experiences and own personality. So you're drawn. So you develop that, and then you can have a larger conversation with a larger group of people, and then attend the art fairs and the museums and conferences, and then you develop a taste and a knowledge, and that will really serve you well.
And what do you think about the Asian art? Do you think there is a really unprecedented boom for the Asian art, or has it passed a little bit? And because at one point it was just the Asian art really was the only art to collect. What do you feel about this tendency now?
Asian art is only going to move up. Trajectory is vertical up. Reason is these economies are becoming very, very big. And as economically it's growing, and part of that relationship is that people tend to buy art. And we know that sociologically is proven. When you bought enough cars, enough homes, automatically it's not fulfilling enough. One way, one is the kind of a little bit negative side of the story, which is maybe not negative. You get a social approbation by buying the right kind of art. A lot of hedge fund people, the financial people did that, but then they also served the art world. Without that, the art world would not grow. Now the art world is truly global in that way, and is disseminated across the globe in terms of collecting of art, in terms of talking about art, education of art. Is becoming like a medieval age where art and religion and economy was truly integrated. Something like that is happening because the art industries, both art in a much more larger sense I'm talking about, and particularly also the visual arts or compositional art. And it's becoming a serious part of the industry. So more and more people are getting educated and joining the field. And so on top of that, you have these economies that's growing. And as the economy grows, people are going to be focusing on Asian art or African art now, because it's other parts of the world. I know Asian collectors are looking at African art. They feel there's a great deal of vitality and great deal of interesting things are happening in Africa, and people are paying attention. So likewise, Asian art, they're producing a lot of significant works, and somewhere like 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, people are going to say, wait a minute, those were the really great works of art. It needs a little bit of distillation process, but if you project your mind's eye and start with all the knowledge that you have, art historical knowledge and intuitive knowledge, and plus the education conversation, and try and project, why is this art going to last another 50 years or 100 years? And you have to do that, And if you sense it, that it's going to remain 100 years from now, then it's worth it to follow that.
Interesting. So it's definitely fascination, as you're saying, going to continue for many years to go with regards to Asian art. And so do you feel that there is a bubble of art in the whole world, or present, especially these days?
Well, as I said, there may be a bubble here and there, and it'll burst and it'll come back. It's this part of the economy. Is there a bubble in the economy? I'm not an economist. There's no way for me to say, but there's so much money that's been outlaid out there in the world, is sloshing around. And part of what is happening is that part of that asset class that you have, this hedge fund group, they're moving their asset into art. So that is having a trickle effect in the kind of mainstream art world, which is the primary world. And this is going to go on. This is going to go on for at least next 4 or 5 years. I know that. It feels like it. I may be wrong, but it feels like it's going to continue to grow, the art world. And the art world is also morphing. It's changing in many ways.
Yes, I'm sure, and we'll touch a little bit on the NFTs a little bit later as well. But do you think this tremendous growth and of the art world globally influences the number of all these incredible, actually tremendous number of the art fairs all around the world. What is your take on all these fairs?
The art fairs are, they serve a purpose, a real purpose. One part is that, yeah, art fairs, because there's a demand, then they come up with the art fairs. But another part of the story is that a lot of these countries and cities, they want art because just having infrastructure is not good enough. If you want a global city, global world city, you have to provide for the mental part of a population. How do you provide that? So just you have movie theaters, you have a theaters, then you have to have great museums. But great museums are not easy to build. Even if you build the infrastructure, the physical part of the museum, where do you create a collection? All the money in the world can't create a collection overnight. So what do you do is that at times, some of these countries can't afford a great deal, or they don't have the focuses on development of their or economic development. So what they do, they invite the art fairs. When you have, and within that 1 week long, you have a celebration and you feed the population with the contemporary part of the world, the contemporary art culture. And they're all excited, and then they come back and wait for the next cycle. And that is also a part of that sociological demand that's taking place, Along with that, people are buying art, and if they don't buy art, the art fairs won't come back. So whenever art fair is doing well, is because people are buying art. If they're just looking at an art fair, it doesn't help because it's an enormously expensive affair to mount a show in an art fair. Shipment alone is very, very expensive. So, so if you're especially coming from abroad, then it becomes very, very complicated and complex arrangement process. So in a museum, you can look at it and you enjoy the work of art, but in an art fair, the translation has to be acquisition of art.
Yes. And it also creates builds the community, builds the camaraderie, builds the appreciation of this whole art, I think, world, and probably entices people to immerse themselves a little bit more and study more and appreciate it from a little bit of a different level and start to follow. So I think it's definitely builds that trend of following the art and educating yourself how to be one of these people who enjoy the fairs and who enjoy collecting the art. I agree with that. Now, the NFTs and art, to be honest with you, it's a completely different world for me, and I would like to hear from you a very simple explanation of it in art. How does it work, and whether you're involved in any of the projects associated with it?
A lot of people have come to me to convert some of our artworks into NFTs, but I can't get my head around it. And I'll tell you why. Because one reason is that most of the people who are connected with NFTs are not from the art world people. Most of the art world people, I haven't come across, at least in America and New York, none of the art world, museum curators or directors, or they haven't stepped into the NFT world. Again, because they don't understand it. The focus in NFT is a two-part. One is money, and the second is technology, and the third is the medium. But they don't talk about the artist. They don't talk about the greatness of art. And that'll happen. NFTs will definitely happen. But will it happen? It's like an autonomous car. We are hearing about it for a long time. Yes. And they probably have the technology to bring it to your roads, but who is going to insure you? Who is going to, all this technical aspect that exists, and that's preventing you from launching that car. And something akin to that's happening in the art world, is that unless you're a digital native, you are creating the artworks in the process using that technology. Most of these people, what they're talking about translating, they are taking a photograph of this art that's already been created 20 years ago or 10 years ago or 2 years ago and translating that into an NFT form. That I don't think will catch on. But if you're a digital native and you're able to create a great work of art on the basis of NFT, then I think it will take place. And the second wave will come when the metaverse takes place and the whole world, composition of the world is in this space. I think definitely NFT will take real movement forward.
So it seems like it is a huge component of the art trend these days, and it's only going to flourish more and more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In one way, it's
Yeah,
probably more,
absolutely.
will be morphed into something else, but yes. Let's talk about your own galleries and what made you open the galleries, because it's actually a very big risk, I believe. And how did it all start? You have 4 galleries at the moment. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey of art galleries, Sundaram
Yeah.
Tagore art galleries?
So I started, I wasn't planning to open a gallery. That came about by default. And what I mean by that, I was studying art history, and I was finishing up my PhD when I came back to New York. And prior to that, I'd worked in the 80s when I was in mid 80s when I was living in New York. I was running around working in different galleries and interned in Asia Society. So I did my part, all of that part. But when in the 90s, when I returned to New York after having studied art history and working on my dissertation topic was called Indian Artist Response to European Modernism. It dealt with this East-West connection. And
Yes.
from very dissertation topic title. And what that meant was, how does a great tradition, and you can apply that to many,
So
China,
any
Indonesia, any of it,
cross-cultural,
all exactly.
yes,
How does a great tradition modernizes in the context of visual art? Because
yes.
very basis of modernism is a rejection of tradition. If it's a rejection of tradition, how do you create, how can you, when you come from this very long tradition, how can you reject your tradition? So my viewpoint was, they did not really reject the tradition, and therefore they fell into the kind of postmodern space. Anyway, that's a long story. We can go into that conversation. So modernism was my great love affair, and out of that, I was working at the Metropolitan Museum at the education department, giving lectures every week. And I thought about it, what to do. So my interest was being in a museum world, working as a curator, and I was trying to finish up my dissertation simultaneously. And at that point, I met someone and who invited me, and then it was the owners of Pace Wildenstein who asked me if I wanted to join and take care of the Asian division, essentially marketing Pace Wildenstein. Pace and Wildenstein had combined together, and they became the biggest gallery, period.
Yes.
And because at that point, so they were marketing there, they had estate of Picasso and Braque and you name it, all these major important de Kooning, they had all these important artists and they wanted to market their art in Asia. So I was hired for that purpose. So some years later, what happened, the big financial crisis that happened in Asia before it happened in the West. And I got laid off. And then I joined a friend of mine was working in the UN with their 50th anniversary, and she had asked me if I wanted to join the UN and help her mount a world global art exhibition for the UN. So I joined them. So then what happened? I was into this temporary space. I would finish up an exhibition and I move to the next one. At that point, I decided to open my own gallery. So
You've learned enough
I
to,
learned enough, exactly.
yes, to bring it all out into your own space. Great.
Yeah, but still, I learned a lot when I opened the
Yes.
gallery. I had one of the biggest galleries in New York at that time. I'd taken the drawing center. I thought, okay, and a ground floor. It was really enormous gallery, and when I went, I knew Robert Rauschenberg. I knew all these artists really well. I mean, very, very. I was traveling with them, and I said, "Will you give me your art?" And he said, no, I can't because I'm locked in with another gallery. And I think he was with Gagosian at that point. That's when I realized, oh my God, it's not that freewheeling anymore. It's not, you just give some artworks. And especially if you wanted to deal with important artists. And at even that early stage, it was very much contractual. And so I learned my way. It's like joining a monastic order. There isn't a book there. Now it's a lot more easier. So you learn through actually being in that space.
Well, you obviously had to be, and you are definitely street smart. You had to be street smart. You've learned your ropes for sure. Besides the passion and knowledge of art, but you definitely knew, especially in New York, to survive in New York and any kind of a field is difficult, but an art field is you have to be street smart. So kudos to you. And when you choose your now and at that time, how do you choose your pieces? And does your personal taste influence you? What is the criteria?
Well, I mean, as I was saying earlier on, you have to, all the knowledge, the art historical knowledge you have, all the museums and the biennales. I go to all the biennales and triennales, so I'm seeing what's happening, and not just in one country, across the globe. And that's the plus side of the story of being in the art world today, that you do get to travel very easily, and you're joining the conferences, you're in conversations with other critics and curators. We're all constantly meeting, right? With that, and then you kind of project your mind's eye. Why will the artist, out of millions of artists, why do I need to? So you really have to be a really good editor. And as a gallerist, you're looking and looking and looking, and you're editing and editing and editing. All of this simultaneously is going on. You're editing it for your client base. That these artists, this artist, from your perspective, this is the viewpoint, this is the stance we're taking. This artist is important. Why? Because of this reason. And so that is, and then you're editing further by the kind of art that's coming in and shown on the wall, or you're taking it to the art fair. So that process, so if you're a good gallerist, you have to be that. You really have to be that. Otherwise, you are all over the place.
Incredible. So it's really, you deconstructed the whole process for me here. But your personal feelings, your personal considerations, your personal taste, what role does it play in choosing? I mean, you just told me what it takes and how to go through the process, but does your intuition and your personal taste play a part?
So I'm really interested in kind of a cross culture. What I mean by that is, well, I'm drawn to that. I'm drawn to people who have lived in many cultures, or they don't have to travel and live in all cultures. They have an open mind, and they have, I think questions are more important than answers, because the questions are open-ended. But when you have answers, it's defined. You've already have an answer. So questions are really, really important. And so you question, and within that, I like the hand of the artist. For me, the material part, the materiality, there's a term in art history called haptic, the hand of the artist. That is very, very important. So how do that, even if you're looking at a photographer, or if so you're looking at a painter, you're looking at a sculptor, the hand of the artist is very, very important. And that comes through. Then the trans culture, or multiple cultures, how that influence has been absorbed and distilled and pushed through their own vision. How do they do it? Is there uniqueness in the voice? Those are kind of elements that you're looking for, and that's how I go about selecting them.
I love how you talk with so much passion. It's like it's magnetic. Thank you for that. You dealt and you've been dealing with a lot of the important artists, with a lot of photographers and painters, and some of them probably might be hard to approach. I've dealt in my life through my career with so many well-known actors and stars and celebrities and artists as well, and I've learned how to pay attention to their egos and learn my ropes, as they say. Can you share some of the anecdotes from your interaction, from your life with artists that you might want to tell us a little
I
bit,
always
if
say,
it's not secret?
It's a relationship. I always say there aren't bad people. They're only bad relationship, right? We have a bad relationship with someone, and then that person becomes bad or good. We have a good relationship. Yes. They're always good and bad in all of us, and how do you? So in terms of the artists, they're much more sensitive. And what I mean by that, because they live in a kind of isolated world, and they need this kind of a introspective world of all being alone, so they don't know the social adjustment of what we have to deal with. We are dealing with clients, you're dealing with curators, you're dealing with people from all walks of life, and constantly we're adjusting and adapting. And artists, they don't have to do that. And that's the reason they're artists, because they're tapping into something more bigger in some ways and smaller in some ways, right? because the space in the initial sense is smaller, but in the deeper sense is much bigger, because they have become like the shamans of today's age, you know, because they are getting into the collective unconscious, because, and you see that through their art. So yes, they can be testy, they can be tough sometimes, they can be, but you have to know, because essentially if you're managing talent, you have to know how to manage these people, and that is all based on relationship, and you know that very well.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. I can relate to it. I deal with it all the time, and you have to be sort of a therapist, a psychologist, an intuitive, a shaman, whatever you want to call it, but you have to feel the person in any situation. And during the COVID, has it affected or changed in any way the way you communicate with artists?
Oh yeah, of course. With the one part is that
And with
technology,
collectors as well.
yeah, technology has speeded everything up for us and connected us further. And what happened during COVID, we thought we were finished. This was never expected this, as you know. We are already forgetting it so quickly. At least in America, you're forgetting it. You don't see anyone wearing masks. They're walking around. It's just normalized. I don't know, good or bad. I'm just saying. So during COVID, we were truly isolated. And I did speak to some of our artists. And for instance, I spoke to Hiroshi Senju. He was saying, you know, he paints sometimes very, very big canvases, right? And he was saying he did everything from the beginning to the end, meaning crushing his paint, creating the paint, because he couldn't import paints, you know, they weren't, you couldn't ship. He was creating his own paint. He was actually creating the canvases, the base, and moving the paint beside painting it. So every square inch of that space, he created it. And that was during COVID, because there was no one else to have a conversation with. Even his wife, you know, who would play a role in sort of helping him. But she wasn't there, you know, she was, because of COVID, you were creating a distance, you know. And so that was one of the important part I learned. Now that structure, I thought it was getting totally dismantled. The art world structure, which is a museum, a gallery, or art fairs, and being an artist studio, everything was kind of, the structures were falling apart. Now I think those structures remain the same, and they're being reinforced. So nothing much has changed yet. A lot of things have changed. Fundamentally, a lot of things have changed, but superficially, nothing has changed.
Yes, and not only necessarily for the worse, but I feel for the better. I think even to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that even collectors or people who, you know, during these years, since they had a chance to spend so much time at home, and it maybe perhaps urged them to appreciate certain things more, to immerse themselves in a different areas where they haven't learned enough, and perhaps since they were spending much more time at home, maybe they wanted to beautify their homes, and this is when the art comes as well. And I've seen it around Singapore, around Asia as well, that people really started to develop more appreciation, I should say, for art.
Yeah, we saw in our clients, and as I was explaining to you, I thought we were done. I thought we were finished. But right after COVID, a month after COVID, everyone started buying art completely, because they had seen the artists before and seen may have another form of art, but they were using the internet to buy the artwork. So we were exhibiting on the essentially through this process of digital process. We were a viewing room, artist room we were creating, and we were sending it out. And a lot of the people in the art world did well across the board, I have to say. And that has become a permanent feature of the art world. People are not trusting the internet, but now they are, you know, on this basis. If they know you, and if they've seen the art, and if they trust you, then it's working really well.
Yeah, talking about knowing yourself, how long on average does it take you to entice a gallerist, or you personally entice to a potential customer to buy a piece? How do you work the field?
It feels like they're buying it. They've met you and they decide to buy it, but it takes a long time. It takes many interaction and many levels, and then they're also hearing the story from outside, what other people, other collectors have to say, especially the collectors, because
Yes.
if you're talking about the galleries, we all tend to be competitors in some form, But if you listen to the collectors, then you get a neutral viewpoint,
Yes.
And so it takes many exchanges, many appearances, many art fairs, many presentation, and at some point they leap on that, they take the decision, but it feels
Yes.
like they just bought it. I just met them, but no, it really happened.
It
Uh,
takes
it takes an
grooming.
enormous amount of grooming. Exactly, it
Yes.
takes a lot of grooming. Yeah.
I understand. And what are the exhibitions you have right now at the galleries?
We have a beautiful exhibition of this very important Singaporean artist called Jane Lee, as you know.
Yeah, I love her. Yes.
Because
I
we have a
went
global
for
audience right now,
research.
so I
Yes.
have to explain it.
Oh,
Right?
wonderful.
And it's really amazing. Absolutely, the way she treats paint is unbelievable. She's kind
Yes.
of a shy person, but when she's actually handling paint, she's a completely different person. So that's in Singapore.
Yeah,
And
she's definitely very powerful. She kind of like surgically decomposes the whole uh,
the painting
notion of
structure, exactly.
painting structure. Exactly.
Absolutely
Yes.
right. And then we have a very important exhibition of Anila Aga Khoyam, who is a Pakistani American artist. There are like 16 museums, a waiting list who wants to have a show. 8 already had her show exhibition, and she does this beautiful light installation and transforms her space, and that's been rated as one of the best shows in New York right now, and by Artsy.
Fantastic.
So yeah, it's really exciting.
Fantastic. What do you say about what is your feel for the art scene in Singapore?
The art scene in Singapore is very dynamic and is working, but also I think, Singapore has the best museums in Asia. They do it in such a beautiful way, refined. They they have, but I think the population, they get very bored very easily. So they're always for the new thing, one thing after another, and you can't hold them in one space. And that's where the problem is in terms of the explosion of Singaporean
Yes.
art form. It's how do you keep them? How do they keep coming back to you over and over and over again? So you build a deeper and longer conversation. And if you can't have that, and they are the next best thing and next grander thing and next brighter and next more glitzier thing, if that happens, then we get into a difficult space. So that's where we are in terms of Singaporean
Got
arts.
it. But hopefully it is in the further development
Evolution, yeah,
stage,
because
and evolution is happening.
yeah, because you have to give them credit in the sense, a very short span of things, a lot of things
Yes.
happened. So, and that is part of also the indication of that, right? And so if you're compressing everything, and so you can feel the vibration more quickly. But if you give them 10, 15, 20 years, right? And I think there's a real potential of Singapore becoming a major art space in the
Got it.
context of the world art. Because they're doing the
That's
museum part, they're doing it really
yes.
well.
Yes.
Really, really well,
Yes. Absolutely, I agree. It's beautiful spaces and just beautifully preserved and yet modernized at the same time. So yes, I agree with you, and I strongly believe in it as well. Well, I would like to move a little bit from the art scene, I shouldn't say art scene, but gallery scene, into the filmmaking, because you are well known and well regarded filmmaker as well. And this is how you connected, I think, with my son as well, who's also
That's
a
right. Yeah, we
filmmaker.
had a wonderful
So,
conversation with your son.
yes, thank you. And he absolutely adores you, and he was very fortunate to spend time with you talking about the project. So I want to say a few words about your debut film that called The Poetics of Color, not Var Bahvazar, Bahvazar, right?
Bhavsar, yeah, exactly.
Bahvazar.
Yeah.
Yes, it's Artist's Journey. It premiered at the MIAC Film Festival in New York in 2010. And just for people who don't know about this festival, it's the Mahindra Indo-American Art Council's New York-based film festival. And GM several film awards, including the Accolade, the Indie Fest, and the esteemed Singaporean National Critics' Choice Readers Award for the Best Art Film, Epic Documentary of the Year, and the Best New Director in 2012. That was your debut. And your second film, which is absolutely beautiful, and as I said, it is showing on Amazon Prime, and it's Tiger City. It's a feature-length documentary on the world-renowned American architect Louis Icahn. And can you please share with us about this particular movie and what gave you the incentive to work on it? It's the story of Louis Kahn, and which is a very sad and tragic. So I would like to hear from you how it all started.
So if you look at the first film that made Poetics of Color, Natwar Bhavsar, and I looked at this Indian artist living in Soho. He was one of the first denizens of Soho loft, and how he moved into this loft. I was really interested in this idea of what does it mean when you have a big loft space, and that came out of Soho in New York. Then you can create heroic works, large-scale works. And otherwise you can't. If you have a small, tiny space, you create small, tiny works. So that's when the big, grand works and that kind of abstract expressionist works came about. And I looked at his work. He had these humongous pieces, you know. And I thought, okay, I started following him around. And I said, at some point along the line, I decided to make a documentary film on him. And I really enjoyed the process so much that few years, so his journey was someone coming from a small town village in India, in Gujarat, and coming to the epicenter of the artwork. And I wanted a reverse story. So I'm always interested in the interculture and the global story, you know. So there's this great American architect, and he gets a reverse role. He comes to Asia, and he essentially gets a job to build a Indian Institute of Management. Then he builds a parliamentary complex in Bangladesh. He gets to build Islamabad. That fell through. And prior to him, before they went to him, they went to Le Corbusier, and they went to the Finnish architect Alvar Aalto. So all these great architects were involved in the story, you know. And he built his magnum opus, at least at that time, the poorest country in the world, one of the greatest, grandest architectural legacies of modern architecture. When you see it, you don't believe it.
Unbelievable.
23 years, 2,000 people worked on it every day. Enormous, like building the pyramids, you know. And that was an interesting story. So now, and after I built that, and you can see it in actually Amazon Prime. I don't know if you can see it in New York, Singapore, but I think you can see it in quite a few countries. And you can see it in PBS. Art. And few other places, you know, maybe to me. So what happened is that now I'm working on, I'm writing a script about this Jewish population who came to India. And then I've got the option to make William Dalrymple's book, The City of Jinn. And I'm running around trying to raise money for that, you know. But filmmaking, as you know, it's a big part of it is raising money, because pre-production is so important, you know. So that's the place I am in right now. But it's very exciting.
Well, I hope through our conversation today, people will be passionate enough or interested enough to support you. The project that you're working on personally, I think it's really, personally for me, I think it's fascinating, and for Jewish art and cultural community, and I definitely will spread the word here in Singapore as well, through the Jewish community as well. So I think it's really
so much.
Fascinating. But yes, it is a hard work, and I can hear it from my son as well, that fundraising especially is a tough part, and finding the like-minded people is also tough. But you guys are so passionate and so dedicated to the subjects and cause and process of it all, that kudos to you. So thank you for sharing this. And I know how hard it is. It is hard to get off the ground any movie project. So it's really
you know it from the beginning to end, you know.
Yes,
and you've been associated with it
as an observer, but by association, yes. So definitely. Your personal beliefs, how do you connect with your own self? And we spoke a lot when we get together, we speak about spirituality and we speak about the values. So I would like you to share a little bit, how do you connect with yourself, and how do you connect through that with others as well?
You know, what happens is that I love people. I love to be with people. I really, really love people. But then, and I'm surrounded by people all the time. But then
Yes.
there are times when I completely, absolutely isolated, and I need to go on my own journey. So I go on these long trips when I can, break away, and I need to find the, the equanimity, the mental equanimity, where I'm not distracted by conversation. I'm not
Yes.
distracted by multiple sort of focus that you have to have. And so that, and I take these long, long, extensive walks when I'm going to a new city, and I'll be completely lost. And I love that exploration,
Yes.
looking at the details, looking at the, the city features, and the morphology of that space, how it's taken shape. Those are kind of really, really interesting. And then I'll walk into a museum. The moment I walk into a museum of that city, I can tell you which economic state they are in. Are they focusing on the past, or what kind of economic condition they are in? What's the future? You can essentially decode it like a tea leaf.
Yes.
By looking at the museum, because that's where repository of our culture, right? Everything
Absolutely.
happens. We,
Absolutely.
we're archiving all of this greatness. Our greatness is in the museum. So if you have
Yeah.
a bad museum, if you're not taking care of it, be aware of that. So you
Yes.
have to be really careful that
It's a
people are
face.
paying
It's a
attention.
face of the city. It's a face of the country. Absolutely, and it's a cultural, of course, imposition on others, and it's a face for sure. It's a face. Yeah, and you just mentioned about you love people and you're surrounded by people all the time, and I observed you, and you're very, very personal when you talk to the people. But sometimes, and I experience it as well, the small talk, the art of the making the conversation and small talk, sometimes it could be quite taxing. So what is important during the vernissage in a small talk? Where do you draw the line, I should say,
See,
in making a small talk?
right. So we are always drawn to people who are curious, right? If you have a
Yes.
curiosity and if you have compassion, we're
Yes.
drawn to you because you're a different breed. You have both the components. And if you have these two, and if you approach the world in that context, I'm curious about you, I want to know more about you. And I feel that, yeah, I get the right vibration because you're compassionate. You're like a Buddha figure, right? So if you have an element of that,
Yes.
that's the magnet, the gravitational pull. And
Yes.
so, yeah, so small talk, sometimes you can't avoid it because of the very nature of it, but getting to the heart of the matter and how quickly you can get to it. And sometimes you won't connect. Simply
Yes.
they're so
Yes.
blocked off, and you simply won't connect. And we don't need to please everyone because we can't.
I agree. I agree.
In life, you can't.
Yeah, so we have to be true to ourselves for sure, at least to a certain extent.
Yeah,
And
authenticity is very, very important because everything
absolutely.
exists, but you can't, if you're
Yes.
authentic, people will know that.
Yes. And I've been, I believe, authentic all my life, and the older I become, the more of importance it is for me. So yes, I don't definitely short side this particular notion that I have to be authentic with others and to my own self. What is your basic spiritual daily routine? And you shared a little bit with me the other time when we had a dinner together.
I do a little bit of, I wake up in the morning and I go to the park with my dog. We have a little dog, and that had to be taken out of our apartment at the moment because otherwise it'd be barking all day long. But then when I come back, I do a little bit of breathing technique. That's my
Yes.
meditation.
Yes.
And that's very
Yes.
important. That kind of centers me, because all
Yes.
these troubles are like, waves, appears and disappears. But what remains constant is the breathing part of it really keeps me centered. So whenever I'm anxious or anxiety prone, I've learned this breathing technique, and that really brings me to the center. And I try to do that more often when I'm in the airplane and when I'm in
Yes.
the airport. I'm alone, surrounded by people, but I'm still alone. And that
Yes.
allows me to do that. And at home, I'd like to do that at least for a few minutes per day. And
Yes.
then I like to take walks. I like to walk, and I find it very difficult in a city where I can't walk. And so I've always lived in cities where you can walk different
Yes.
places.
The same with me. I walk miles and miles. I rarely take public transport anywhere I travel in the big cities. I just walk. So I am totally with
That's
you.
very
And
healing, actually.
very healing, very healing. And I like to observe even the light in the windows, through the windows. I go and I look at the windows of in the buildings, and I kind of imagine the life of each particular household or family, and I create the sort stories. And I've been like this since my childhood. It's interesting. Sometimes it gives me anxiety. Sometimes it's very therapeutic. It depends on the colors that I see through the windows. But yes, it's definitely feel for the city that you acquire through walking the streets. And my last question before we finish up the conversation today, what is your advice to the Generation Z who are completely engrossed in technology and the internet these days? What would you tell this younger generation?
I would say follow your bliss and take the Joseph Campbell word, take it seriously. If you follow your bliss, you'll be happy and the money will come, follow you. That will happen. But you really must follow, you must have passion and you have to follow your bliss. So that would be my advice.
It's a wonderful advice. Wonderful. And I think I'm not a Generation Z, obviously, but I will listen to your advice as well. I think all of us should really be fortunate and to hear this from you. And thank you so much, Sundaram,
Thank you.
once again
The
for
real
joining
pleasure.
us today at the Conversations with Olga. And it's just such a pleasure to let you express yourself, and you being so passionate and so driven by your emotions and your knowledge. It's really, really very humbling.
Thank you so
Now,
much. Really, really appreciate it. Great pleasure to be here.
and just to mention to all of our listeners, this conversation will be recorded, so I will post it on my IGTV at Events by Olga. I will also post it on LinkedIn, and I will also post it on YouTube. There is a YouTube program is called Conversations with Olga, and you can hear and listen and watch all the episodes. Today, as I said, is episode number 35. And please follow Sundaram. Please go and visit his galleries. Please go and watch his films and support art and support Sundaram. And thank you so much. And of course, his Instagram is Sundaram Tagore, so you will see developments and happenings and sharings on his site as well. And till I see you very soon again, Sundaram. I'm looking
Thank you
forward.
so much. You're so generous. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.